The appraiser's truck pulled into the gravel drive at exactly 9 a.m., and I watched from the kitchen window as Marcus Hale stepped out with his clipboard and that particular kind of professional sympathy people reserve for farm sales. I hadn't slept. The coffee in my hand had gone cold an hour ago, and I was still wearing my father's flannel shirt over yesterday's clothes. "Morning, Claire," Marcus called out, his boots crunching across the gravel. He was a decent man, mid-50s, who'd appraised half the failing farms in Lancaster County over the past decade. "I'm sorry about your dad. John was a good man." I nodded because speaking felt impossible. Dad had been gone 3 weeks, and the silence in the house still felt like a held breath. The funeral had brought a crowd, farmers from 3 counties, the entire congregation from First Baptist, his Thursday poker group, the kids he'd mentored through 4-H over 40 years. They'd filled the house afterward with casseroles and condolences, and then they'd left. And I was alone, with 340 acres of Pennsylvania farmland I had no idea how to manage, and a brother who hadn't bothered to come home. "Let's start with the equipment barn," I said, setting down my mug. The November morning was sharp and clear, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible and your fingers ache. The equipment barn stood at the north end of the property, a massive structure Dad had built in 1987, back when the farm was thriving and the future looked certain. Inside, the smell of old motor oil and hay dust hit me immediately, bringing with it a flood of memories I wasn't ready for. Dad teaching me to change spark plugs when I was 8, the sound of his laugh echoing off the metal walls, his patient hands guiding mine. Marcus walked slowly through the barn, making notes. The newer John Deere combine, the hay baler that still ran like a dream, the 2 pickup trucks, one from 2003 that Dad had babied, another from the 90s that barely started. He recorded serial numbers, assessed conditions, estimated values with the detached efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times. And then we came to the back corner. The 1952 Ferguson sat exactly where it had sat for the past 15 years, partially covered by a stained tarp, surrounded by scattered parts and empty oil cans. Rust had claimed the wheel wells, the hood, the exhaust pipe. The front left tire was completely flat, had been for a decade. Mice had nested in the engine compartment. The seat was torn, foam spilling out like an old wound. "Scrap," Marcus said, not even bothering to write it down. "Might get $100 from the salvage yard. Maybe 200 if someone wants it for parts." I stared at the tractor. Dad used to call it rust toward the end, a joke that had become bitter truth. This was the tractor he'd learned to drive on when he was 12. The one his father had bought new in 1952 for $1,200, a fortune back then. This was the machine that had ploughed every field on this farm for 30 years before the hydraulics failed, and Dad bought the newer equipment. He'd always said he'd restore it. Someday. When he had time, when the farm wasn't so demanding, when things slowed down. Things never slowed down. "I'll handle it," I said quietly. Marcus moved on to catalogue the rest of the equipment, but I stayed there, staring at that rusted hulk. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my brother, finally. "Can't make it home this week. Work emergency. Just sell everything and split it. Simple." Simple. Tyler lived in Pittsburgh now, working in tech consulting, wearing expensive suits, dating a woman who'd never touched dirt in her life. He'd left the farm the day after high school graduation 18 years ago and had barely looked back. He'd come home for holidays sometimes, awkward visits where he'd check his phone constantly and leave early. He hadn't come home at all in the past 2 years. He hadn't come home for Dad's funeral. "Claire," Marcus called from across the barn. "You want me to appraise the livestock next or the land parcels?" "Land parcels," I said, my voice sounding strange even to myself. We spent the next 2 hours walking the property. The cornfields that hadn't been planted in 3 years. The pastures where Dad's small cattle herd still grazed, looked after now by Tommy Jensen from the next farm over. who'd been doing it out of kindness and wouldn't accept payment, the old tobacco barn that hadn't been used since the 80s, the creek that marked the western boundary, the same creek where Dad had taught me to fish when I was 5. Marcus took photos, made measurements, consulted comparable sales on his tablet. The numbers he quoted made my stomach turn. The farm was worth something, certainly. Prime Pennsylvania farmland always was, but not nearly as much as it should have been. Years of deferred maintenance, declining productivity, Dad's inability to modernize or adapt to new agricultural economics, all of it reflected in Marcus's careful assessment. "You're looking at about 800,000 for the whole property," he said as we walked back toward the house. "Could be more if you subdivide and sell to developers, but that'd take time. The equipment, maybe another 60,000 total. The cattle, if you want to sell them, another 20. I did the math in my head. Split with Tyler, that was enough for each of us to... What? Start over? Pay off debts? Buy smaller properties elsewhere? It was enough to walk away. "I'll have the full report to you by Friday," Marcus said, shaking my hand. "Take your time deciding. There's no rush." But there was a rush. The bank had already started calling about the mortgage Dad had taken out 4 years ago to upgrade the irrigation system. Property taxes were due in January. The feed bill for the cattle was mounting. I had maybe 3 months before decisions started making themselves. I walked back to the house alone, but I didn't go inside. Instead, I found myself returning to the equipment barn, to that back corner where rust sat in shadow. I pulled off the tarp completely, exposing the full extent of the decay. The paint had faded from red to a patchy orange-brown. The steering wheel was cracked. The gear shift was frozen in place. I climbed up into the seat anyway, the torn vinyl rough against my jeans. The view from up there was exactly as I remembered it. Dad had let me sit on his lap while he drove this tractor when I was 4 or 5, my small hands on the wheel, while his larger ones did the actual steering. I remembered the sound of the engine, the smell of diesel, the vibration through the metal frame, the way Dad would sing old Johnny Cash songs over the engine noise. I remembered the last time I'd seen this tractor actually run. I was 14, and Dad had fired it up for one final pass through the north field before retiring it. He'd been crying, though he'd tried to hide it. "End of an era, Claire Bear," he'd said. "My daddy drove this tractor. I drove this tractor. I thought maybe." Well, things change. My phone buzzed again. Tyler. "Realtor friend says we should list ASAP. Spring market is best. Can you start clearing out the house?" I looked at the rusted tractor, at the barn around me, at the fields beyond. I thought about Dad's hands, calloused and strong, gentle when they needed to be. I thought about Tyler, who'd rather text than call, who reduced 40 years of our father's life to a real estate transaction. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with Dad, 3 days before the heart attack took him. We'd been sitting on the porch at sunset, and he'd been tired, so tired, in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I failed this place," he'd said quietly. "Failed to keep it going. Failed to make it something you'd want." I told him he was wrong, that he'd done everything he could, that the farm was beautiful and meaningful and mattered. But I'd been planning to leave too. I had applications into graduate programs in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, in D.C. I was going to study environmental policy, work for think tanks, make a difference in ways that didn't involve dirt under my fingernails and the constant grinding uncertainty of agricultural life. I'd been planning to leave, just like Tyler had, just like everyone did eventually. I sat in that tractor seat until the November sun began to set, painting the barn in shades of amber and shadow. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted in me. Not a decision exactly, not yet, but a question that wouldn't leave me alone. What if I didn't sell? What if I stayed? What if I tried? The thought was absurd. I was 28 years old, a recent graduate with a bachelor's in environmental science and exactly zero farming experience beyond childhood chores. I didn't know how to manage 300 acres. I didn't know how to make the farm profitable. I didn't know anything except that the thought of strangers living in my father's house, developers carving up his fields, this tractor going to a salvage yard where it would be crushed into scrap metal, all of it felt like erasing him completely. I climbed down from the tractor as darkness fell. My hands were black with old grease and rust. I'd have to make a decision soon. Tyler was pushing for the sale. The bills were mounting. Spring planting season was only 5 months away. But tonight, I just went back to the house, heated up one of the many casseroles still filling the refrigerator, and sat at the kitchen table where Dad and I had eaten 1,000 meals together. The house creaked and settled around me. Familiar sounds that had been the background of my entire childhood. Tomorrow I'd start making calls. I'd talk to the bank, the farm extension office, maybe some of Dad's old friends who still worked their land. I'd figure out what staying would actually require, what it would cost, what the odds of success might be. But tonight I let myself imagine it. Walking those fields in the spring, bringing the farm back, proving that 40 years of my father's work hadn't been for nothing, and strangely, impossibly, the first step I imagined was dragging that old Ferguson out of the shadows and seeing if, against all logic and reason, I could make it run again. The first person I called was Tommy Jensen, our neighbor to the east. Tommy was 63, had been farming his family's land since before I was born, and had been Dad's closest friend for 40 years. He answered on the second ring. "Claire, honey, how you holding up?" "Tommy, I need to know if I'm crazy." There was a pause, then a dry chuckle. "Well, that depends. What are you thinking about doing?" "Keeping the farm." The silence that followed was longer. I could hear the television in the background at Tommy's house, some news program. His wife Martha was probably making dinner. Normal, ordinary sounds from a normal, ordinary life that farming had somehow sustained for them. "Does Tyler know you're thinking this?" "No, and he wouldn't understand." "Probably not," Tommy agreed. "Look, you want my honest opinion?" "Always." "Come by tomorrow morning, early. I'll show you what you're in for." I arrived at Tommy's farm at 5:30 a.m. when the sky was just beginning to lighten. He was already up, had been for an hour, checking on his dairy cows. Martha brought us coffee in thermoses, and we walked his property as he explained exactly what keeping my father's farm operational would require. "First thing you need to understand," Tommy said, his breath fogging in the cold morning air, "is that your dad's farm hasn't been profitable in at least 5 years. He was drawing down savings, taking out loans, barely breaking even. The only reason he kept it going was pure stubbornness and the fact that he'd already put 40 years into the place." "I know." "Do you?" "Because farming isn't romantic, Claire. It's not about sunrises and fresh air and connection to the land. It's about waking up at 4 a.m. every single day. It's about watching your crops fail because of weather you can't control. It's about equipment breaking down at the worst possible moment and repairs you can't afford. It's about commodity prices set by people who've never touched dirt in their lives, and subsidies that favor corporate operations, and regulations that make sense in theory, but are hell in practice." "You do it," I said quietly. "I do it because I'm 63 years old, and I don't know how to do anything else. Because this farm has been in my family for 4 generations, and my kids are waiting for me to die so they can sell it and split the money. Because I'm too stubborn and too stupid to quit." We stopped at the edge of one of his cornfields. The stalks had been harvested weeks ago, leaving only stubble and empty earth. "But," Tommy continued, his voice softening, I also do it because there's something about this life that gets into your blood. Something about working with the seasons, about coaxing life from dirt, about being part of something bigger than yourself. Your dad felt it. I feel it. And if you're standing here at 5:30 in the morning asking me if you're crazy for wanting to try, then maybe you feel it too. I don't know what I feel, I admitted. I just know I'm not ready to let it go. Then let's talk practically. You've got 340 acres, most of it sitting fallow. You've got equipment that's worth something but needs maintenance. You've got no livestock except those 20 cattle your dad kept out of sentiment, and you've got no clear crop plan for next season. You've also got bills mounting and a brother who wants his inheritance in cash. Yes. So here's what I think you should do. First, you need to buy out Tyler's share or work out an agreement where he gets paid over time. Can't make any decisions with him hovering. Second, you need to talk to Ray Chen at the Farm Service Agency. He knows every program, every loan, every grant available. He helped your dad more than once. Third, you need to decide what you're actually going to farm and how. You can't just wing it. I was taking notes on my phone, trying to keep up. Fourth, Tommy said, and his voice got serious. You need to understand that this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. You're going to have moments where you want to quit. Days where everything goes wrong. Seasons where you lose money instead of making it. And you're going to be doing it mostly alone, because that's what farming is. Solitary, relentless work that doesn't care about your feelings or your plans. Why are you telling me this? Shouldn't you be encouraging me? I am encouraging you, Tommy said, by being honest. The only way you'll make it is if you go in with your eyes open. Your dad, he loved this farm, but he also got ground down by it. Wore himself out trying to keep it going, without adapting, without asking for help, without admitting when things weren't working. You can't make his mistakes. We walked back to his farmhouse in silence. Martha had breakfast waiting, eggs, bacon, toast, strong coffee, and we sat at their kitchen table while she asked practical questions. Did I have money saved? Did I have a business plan? Did I know anything about accounting, equipment maintenance, soil management, crop rotation, pest control, weather forecasting, commodity markets? The answer to almost everything was no. Then you've got a lot to learn, Martha said, not unkindly, and not much time to learn it. By the time I left Tommy's farm, the sun was fully up, and I had a list of 23 things I needed to do immediately. Top of the list, talk to Tyler. I tried calling him 3 times that day. He didn't answer. Finally, at 8 p.m., he texted, "In meetings all day, what's up?" I typed and deleted 5 different responses before settling on, "Need to talk about the farm. Can you call when you're free? Can it wait? Slammed this week. No." My phone rang 2 minutes later. "What's going on?" Tyler sounded irritated, and I could hear traffic noise in the background. He was probably walking to his car, squeezing me in between work and whatever dinner plans he had. "I want to keep the farm." Silence. Then, "What?" "I want to keep it, keep farming it. I'm not ready to sell." "Claire, we talked about this. We agreed." "You decided. You sent me a text saying to sell everything and split it. That's not the same as us talking about it." "Because there's nothing to talk about." His voice rose. "The farm is barely functional. Dad ran it into the ground trying to keep it going. The smart thing, the logical thing, is to sell while we can still get decent money for it. It was Dad's entire life. Yeah, and look where it got him. Worked himself to death for a piece of land that never gave him anything back. I'm not romanticizing that, Claire. I'm being realistic. You didn't even come to his funeral. The silence that followed was cold and sharp. "That's not fair," Tyler said finally, his voice tight. "Isn't it? You haven't been home in 2 years. You left the day after graduation and never looked back. You don't get to make decisions about this place when you haven't cared about it for 18 years. I cared. I just cared about other things more. I cared about having a life that wasn't about fighting with weather and markets and equipment failures. I cared about having a career, a future, options. Dad understood that. Did he? Or did he just not fight you because he was too tired and disappointed to try? Another silence. When Tyler spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, harder. If you want to keep the farm, fine, buy me out. I'll have a lawyer draw up papers valuing my half of the inheritance. You pay me my share, and you can do whatever you want with the place. Run it into the ground, turn it into an organic commune. I don't care. I don't have that kind of money, Tyler. Then I guess we're selling. There are programs. I can take out loans. I can work out payment plans. Claire. He cut me off. I need that money. Jennifer and I are looking at houses. We want to start a family. I can't have my inheritance tied up in a failing farm while you try to play farmer and prove some point about Dad's legacy. This isn't about proving a point. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, you're having some kind of grief-induced crisis, and you're about to make a massive financial mistake that's going to hurt both of us. I closed my eyes, trying to control my anger. Give me 6 months. What? Give me 6 months. Let me try to make it work. If I can't, we sell, but give me a chance to try. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Just wait while property values fluctuate and the farm deteriorates further? I'll pay you rent. I'll find a way to make monthly payments toward buying your share. I'll get a part-time job if I have to. Just give me 6 months. Tyler let out a long breath. I'll think about it. I need to talk to Jennifer. Tyler, I said I'll think about it. I have to go. He hung up. I sat in Dad's office, my office now, I supposed, surrounded by filing cabinets full of 40 years of farm records, feeling the weight of what I was trying to do. The rational part of my brain was screaming that Tyler was right, that I was being emotional and impractical, that I should take the money and start fresh somewhere else. But there was another part, quieter but insistent, that kept pulling me back to that equipment barn, to that rusted tractor sitting in shadow. The next morning, I went back to it. In the daylight, it looked even worse than I remembered, every flaw exposed, every failure visible. I took photos, sent them to a tractor restoration forum I'd found online, and got back responses that ranged from skeptical to outright discouraging. 15 years sitting, engines probably seized. Mouse damage to the wiring alone could cost more than the tractor's worth. You'd need to rebuild everything. Easier to buy a running model. But one response was different. A user named FarmDoc67 from Ohio wrote, "I've brought back worse. It's not about what it costs. It's about what it means. You got a manual?" I searched through Dad's office and found it, the original owner's manual from 1952, yellowed and fragile, with Dad's teenage handwriting in the margins noting repairs and modifications. There was also a journal he'd kept, sporadically over the years, entries about the tractor's performance, about breakdowns and fixes, about the day his father had driven it home brand new. The last entry was from 2010, the year Dad had retired it. "Can't keep up anymore, new equipment is faster, more efficient, but damn if it doesn't hurt to put her away, like putting down a loyal dog. Told Claire I'd restore it someday. She believed me. I almost believed myself." I spent the next week dividing my time between practical farm business and that tractor. I met with Ray Chen at the Farm Service Agency, who laid out options for operating loans, equipment financing, and conservation programs. I talked to crop consultants about what might grow well on our soil. I met with the bank about restructuring Dad's loans. And every evening, I'd go to that barn and work on the Ferguson. I started with the simple stuff, cleaning decades of grime, removing the mouse nests, cataloging what parts were salvageable and what needed replacing. I watched YouTube videos on engine restoration. I joined 3 different tractor forums. I ordered a service manual from 1952, reprinted in 2015. FarmDoc67 became an unlikely mentor, walking me through diagnostics via email. First thing, see if the engine's seized. Pour some penetrating oil down the cylinders and let it sit for a week. Then try turning the engine by hand. I followed his instructions exactly. A week later, with a breaker bar on the crankshaft bolt, I tried to turn the engine. It didn't budge. I tried again, putting my full weight into it. Nothing. I tried for an hour until my hands were blistered and my arms ached, and the engine remained frozen solid. That night, Tyler called back. "I talked to Jennifer," he said. "We'll give you 6 months, but I want a formal agreement drawn up. Monthly payments toward buying out my share. And if you can't make it work, we list the property immediately. No arguments, no delays." "Thank you," I managed. "Don't thank me. Just don't make me regret this." After he hung up, I should have felt relieved. I'd gotten what I asked for, time, a chance. But all I could think about was that seized engine, that impossible tractor, and the fact that I'd just committed to turning around a failing farm in 6 months, when I couldn't even get a single piece of machinery to move. I went back to the barn. It was past midnight, and I should have been sleeping. But I stood there staring at that tractor in the darkness, and for the first time since Dad's funeral, I cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed. I cried for Dad, who'd worked himself to death for land that never loved him back. I cried for Tyler, who'd escaped and built a life elsewhere and wasn't wrong for wanting his inheritance. I cried for myself, for the impossible thing I was trying to do, for the overwhelming odds, for the certainty that I was going to fail. And when I was done crying, when I had nothing left, I climbed back up into that tractor seat, put my hands on that cracked steering wheel, and made myself a promise. I was going to make this thing run. I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was even possible. But I was going to try, because if I could bring this broken, abandoned, impossible piece of machinery back to life, then maybe, just maybe, I could do the same for the farm. January came in cold and brutal, the kind of Pennsylvania winter that makes you forget summer ever existed. I'd been on the farm for 2 months, and the learning curve felt like a vertical wall I was trying to scale with no equipment. Ray Chen had helped me secure an operating loan, but it came with conditions and scrutiny. I had to submit a detailed crop plan, financial projections, monthly reports. I'd decided to plant 100 acres of soybeans. They were relatively forgiving for a beginner, and the price projections were reasonable. The rest of the land would stay fallow while I figured out long-term strategy. But before I could think about spring planting, I had to survive winter. The cattle needed daily care, feeding, checking water troughs that froze overnight, monitoring for illness. Tommy showed me the basics, but he had his own farm to run. Most days I was alone, breaking ice with a sledgehammer at dawn, hauling 50-pound feed bags, learning through mistakes that sometimes had expensive consequences. I'd made my first payment to Tyler, scraped together from the operating loan, and what little savings I had. The second payment was due in 3 weeks, and I had no idea where it was coming from, and through it all, every spare moment, I worked on the Ferguson. The engine had finally turned. After 3 weeks of penetrating oil and patient effort, I'd gotten the crankshaft to move a quarter turn, then half, then full rotations. It was a small victory that had made me cry with relief in the cold barn at 2 a.m., but turning wasn't running. I'd drained oil that looked like black sludge. I'd removed the carburetor and found it clogged with decades of varnish. I'd traced wiring that mice had chewed through. Every fix revealed 3 more problems. Farm Doc 67 kept me going with patient advice. Restoration isn't linear. You fix something, something else breaks. You solve one problem, you discover 2 more. The question isn't whether you'll hit walls. The question is whether you keep going when you do. In late January, Martha Jensen invited me to dinner. I almost said no. I was exhausted, covered in grease, and not fit for human company. But she insisted. Their kitchen was warm and smelled like pot roast. Tommy was at the table, along with another couple I vaguely recognized, Jim and Sarah Martinez, who farmed the property west of ours. They all looked at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity as I sat down, and I realized this wasn't just a friendly dinner. "You look terrible," Martha said bluntly, serving me a plate piled with food. "Thanks. When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" I couldn't remember. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" I took a bite of pot roast instead of answering. "Claire," Tommy said gently, "we're worried about you." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground same as your dad did. I've only been doing this for 2 months. "And you've lost 15 pounds, Martha interrupted. "You're out there at all hours. Tommy sees your barn lights on at midnight at 3 a.m. You're doing the work of 3 people, and you're doing it alone. I don't have a choice." "You do have a choice," Sarah Martinez said. She was younger than the others, maybe 40, and she ran her farm with a directness I was starting to understand came from necessity. "You can ask for help. I can't afford—" "Not everything costs money," Jim said. "There's a reason farming communities work the way they do. We help each other. We trade labor, we share equipment, we look out for each other because we're all fighting the same battles." "I don't want charity." "Oh, it's not charity," Tommy said firmly. "It's how this works. Your dad helped me when my barn roof collapsed in '09. He helped Jim when that drought hit in '14. He helped half the farmers in this county at one point or another. Now we're offering to help you. That's not charity, that's community." I felt my throat tighten. "I don't even know what I need help with." "Everything, maybe." "Then we'll start with the basics," Martha said. "Sarah's going to come by 3 times a week to help with the cattle. Jim knows equipment. He'll consult on what you need to get running for spring planting. Tommy and I will help with the administrative stuff, the paperwork, the planning." "And in return?" I asked. "In return, you don't work yourself to death," Tommy said. "You sleep, you eat, you accept that you can't do this alone." That night, lying in bed, actually lying down in a bed instead of collapsing on the couch in my work clothes, I felt something shift. Not relief exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. The understanding that survival didn't have to mean total isolation. February brought a different kind of crisis. I'd been so focused on the day-to-day operations that I'd missed warning signs with the property. The bank called to inform me that Dad's property taxes from the previous year were still unpaid, a bill for $400 that I hadn't known existed. It was due immediately, or the county would place a lien on the property. I didn't have $8, $400. I barely had $400. I called Tyler in a panic. "Jesus, Claire, how did you not know about this?" "It was buried in Dad's files. I've been going through everything, but there's 40 years of records. This is exactly what I was worried about. Hidden debts, undiscovered problems. We should have sold when we had the chance. I'll figure it out." "How? You're already stretched thin. You made your last payment to me late. If you can't keep up—" "I said I'll figure it out." But I had no idea how. Ray Chen helped me restructure some of the operating loan to cover the taxes, but it meant even tighter constraints going forward. It meant I had no cushion for emergencies. It meant if anything went wrong, and in farming things always went wrong, I'd be finished. That same week, the newest John Deere tractor, the one I needed for spring planting, developed transmission problems. The repair quote was $3, $200. I didn't have $3, $200. Jim Martinez came by to look at it, spent 3 hours diagnosing the problem, and delivered bad news. "You need a new transmission. This one's shot. You can patch it, maybe get through 1 season, but it'll fail again." "How much to patch it?" "Maybe 1,000 in parts if you do the labor yourself." "Can you teach me?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Yeah, I can teach you." We spent 2 weeks rebuilding that transmission. Jim would come by after his own farm work was done, and we'd work in the cold equipment barn until our hands were too numb to hold tools. He was patient, explaining every step, letting me make mistakes and learn from them. "Your dad was proud of you," Jim said one night as we were cleaning up. Talked about you all the time, your degree, your smarts, how you were going to do important things. This wasn't what he meant. Maybe not. But he'd be proud of this too, the fact that you're trying, that you care enough to try. The tractor transmission held, barely. I tested it in early March, and it ran rough but functional. One crisis averted, a dozen more waiting, and through everything I kept working on the Ferguson. By mid-March I had the engine completely disassembled on the barn floor, every part cleaned, catalogued, assessed. Farm Doc 67 had walked me through rebuilding the carburetor. I'd replaced all the gaskets, the spark plugs, the distributor. I'd patched fuel lines and rewired the electrical system. The parts had cost me $847, money I didn't have, charged to a credit card I was afraid to look at the balance on. But on March 18th, with the engine fully reassembled and reinstalled, I tried to start it for the first time. I'd primed the carburetor. I'd checked every connection. I'd followed every step of the starting procedure from the 1952 manual. I set the choke, turned the key to the magneto position, and pushed the starter button. The engine turned over. Once, twice, then nothing. I tried again. Same result. I spent 4 hours troubleshooting, checked the fuel flow, tested the spark plugs, verified the timing. Nothing worked. At 8 p.m., covered in grease and frustration, I finally gave up. I sat on the barn floor back against a tool cabinet and stared at that tractor. "What do you want from me?" I asked it out loud. "I've given you everything, every spare dollar, every spare minute. I've learned skills I never wanted, read manuals that made my head hurt, asked for help from strangers on the internet. What more can I do?" The tractor sat silent, still broken, still refusing to run. My phone rang. Tyler. "Hey," I answered. "I need to talk to you about something." His tone made my stomach drop. "What?" "Jennifer's pregnant." For a moment I forgot about the tractor, the farm, everything. "Tyler, that's wonderful. Congratulations." "Thanks." He paused. "We're going to need the money sooner than we thought. We found a house, but we need a bigger down payment for the monthly payments to be manageable. I know we said 6 months, but how much sooner?" "End of April, 2 months from now." "That's not what we agreed." "I know, but circumstances changed. Life changed. I can't keep waiting, Claire. We're starting a family. We need to move forward." I closed my eyes. "I can't buy you out in 2 months. It's impossible." "Then we sell the farm." "I'm sorry, but that's reality." "You gave me 6 months, and now I'm giving you 2. I know it's not fair, but neither is asking me to put my life on hold while you try to save a farm that was never viable in the first place. Dad's life's work is gone. He's gone, Claire. And nothing you do is going to bring him back. Nothing you do is going to change the fact that he spent 40 years fighting a losing battle. You can't fix this. You can't fix him. And you're going to destroy yourself trying. The line went quiet, except for our breathing. 2 months, Tyler said finally. "I'm sorry, I really am." He hung up. I sat in that barn until well past midnight, looking at the tractor that wouldn't run, thinking about the farm I couldn't save, about my brother who was moving on with his life while I stayed stuck in the past. Tommy found me there at 1 a.m. He'd seen the barn lights still on and come to check. "What happened?" he asked, seeing my face. I told him everything, the shortened timeline, the impossible financial situation, the tractor that refused to run, despite everything I'd done. "I failed," I said quietly. "Dad failed, and now I'm failing the same way." Tommy sat down on the barn floor beside me. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then, "Your dad didn't fail. He lost the farm. He kept it going for 40 years in an industry that chews up small operations and spits them out. He raised 2 kids. He was part of a community. He helped people. He lived a life connected to the land and the seasons and something bigger than himself. That's not failure. Then what is it? It's life. Messy, complicated, imperfect life. Tommy gestured at the tractor. Same as this machine. You've put months into it. You've learned more than most people learn in years. You've tried everything. And yeah, it doesn't run yet. Maybe it never will. But the trying isn't worthless. The learning isn't worthless. Tyler thinks I'm just scared to move on. Maybe you are. Or maybe you're the only one brave enough to stay. Tommy stood up, offered me his hand. Come on, Martha's got leftover pie. You need food and sleep, and tomorrow we're going to figure out a plan. There is no plan. I'm out of options. There's always options. You just can't see them right now because you're exhausted. He pulled me to my feet. Trust me. Sleep. Food. Then we'll figure it out. I followed him to his truck, leaving the barn and its broken tractor in darkness. But as we drove away, I looked back at those fields, at the land my father had loved and fought for, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, but maybe stubbornness. The same stubborn refusal to quit that had kept Dad going for 40 years, that had kept me working on an impossible restoration project when any reasonable person would have given up. I had 2 months. It wasn't enough time, but it was the time I had, and I was going to use every second of it. The next morning, Martha and Tommy sat me down at their kitchen table with coffee and a legal pad. Let's be honest about what you're facing, Tommy said. You need to buy out Tyler's share, which by the appraisal is worth about $400,000. You've got 2 months. You have no way to get that kind of money through conventional loans. You're already overextended. So it's impossible. I didn't say that. Tommy tapped the legal pad. What you need is a different approach. You can't buy the whole farm, but maybe you don't need to. Martha leaned forward. What if you kept the farmhouse, the equipment barn, and 50 acres, the land that matters most, the heart of the property? The rest, the fields Tyler wants to develop anyway, what if you sold those to developers and gave Tyler his share from that? I shook my head. That's still not enough money, and it defeats the whole purpose. I'm trying to save the farm, not carve it up. Are you trying to save the farm? Tommy asked gently. Or are you trying to save what the farm represents? Because those aren't the same thing. I didn't have an answer. Over the next week, I explored every option. I talked to Ray Chen about agricultural grants. I researched conservation easements that might provide cash while protecting land from development. I even called a lawyer about contesting Dad's will, though I abandoned that idea almost immediately. It was expensive, unlikely to succeed, and morally wrong. Meanwhile, spring planting was approaching. I had to get the soybean fields ready or I'd miss the window entirely. Jim helped me get the planter working. Sarah and I repaired fence line for the cattle pastures. Tommy advised on soil testing and seed selection. The work was constant and exhausting, but it was also clarifying. I was learning to read the land, to see what each field needed, to understand the subtle signs of drainage problems or nutrient deficiencies. I was learning the rhythm of agricultural life, the way each task connected to the next, the way everything depended on timing and weather and attention to detail, and every evening I worked on the Ferguson. Farm Doc 67 and I had exhausted the obvious solutions. The engine turned, compression was good, fuel was flowing, spark was present. By every measure, it should run. But it didn't. Sometimes, Farm Doc 67 wrote, there's something that's not in the manual. Something specific to that particular machine, that particular history. You might need to think like the tractor, not like the mechanic. Think like the tractor. What did that even mean? I went back to Dad's journal, reading every entry about the Ferguson. Most were routine maintenance notes, but buried in the 1987 entries, I found something. Had to modify the fuel system after ethanol started showing up in diesel, added inline filter and changed the pickup angle. Engine runs rough without it. A modification. Something Dad had done that wasn't in the original manual. I crawled under the tractor with a flashlight, tracing the fuel line from the tank to the engine, and there it was, a custom-fabricated fuel pickup with a specific angle, connected to a filter that wasn't standard. The filter was clogged solid. I replaced it with a modern equivalent, matched the angle Dad had used, and for good measure, cleaned the fuel tank completely. On April 3rd, with 4 weeks left until Tyler's deadline, I tried to start the Ferguson again. The engine turned over, caught, sputtered, died. I adjusted the choke and tried again. This time it caught and held. The engine ran rough at first, coughing and missing, but after a few minutes it smoothed out. That distinctive sound, the rhythmic thump of the Ferguson's engine, filled the barn. I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, listening to it run, and I was crying again. But this time they were different tears. The tractor ran for 20 minutes before I shut it down. I needed to do more work. The hydraulics still didn't function, the clutch was questionable, and it desperately needed new tires. But the engine ran. The thing everyone said was impossible, the project that had consumed months of my life, had finally, miraculously, worked. I called Farm Doc 67 immediately. Turned out his real name was Robert. He was 71 years old, and he'd been restoring tractors since before I was born. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "How does it feel?" "Like I just solved a puzzle I didn't know I could solve. That's what this is about. Not the machine, the puzzle, the challenge, the proof that impossible is just a word." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that tractor, about the sound of it running, about what it meant. Not in terms of the farm's finances. A restored 1952 Ferguson wasn't going to save the operation. But in terms of what I'd learned, what I'd proved to myself, I'd taken something everyone said was dead and brought it back to life. The next morning, Tommy called with unexpected news. A developer had approached him about buying his farm. He'd said no, but in the conversation he'd mentioned my situation. The developer was interested in the fields on the west side of our property, the portions that bordered the highway and would be valuable for commercial development. "They're offering $200,000 for 120 acres, Tommy said. "It's not enough to buy out Tyler completely, but it's a start, and it would let you keep the core of the farm, the house, the barns, the east fields that are better for farming anyway." "That's selling out," I said. "That's exactly what I didn't want to do." "Is it? Or is it being strategic about what's worth saving?" I spent 3 days thinking about it. Walking those west fields that Dad had never liked much anyway. The soil was heavier, drainage was poor. They'd always been the least productive portions of the property. Then walking the east fields, the land Dad had truly loved, where the soil was rich and the views stretched for miles. I called Tyler. "I have an offer," I told him. "Sell 120 acres to a developer for $200,000. I'll give you that money now. Then I'll buy the rest of your share over 5 years, monthly payments." "That's not what we agreed to." "I know, but it's the best I can do. You get a substantial payment now, enough for your house down payment, and you get regular income for the next 5 years. I get to keep the farm, or at least the heart of it." Tyler was quiet for a long time. "You'd really stay? Really try to make this work?" "I've already been making it work. The cattle are healthy. The spring planting is on schedule. I've got a business plan that Ray Chen says is solid. I'm learning, Tyler, and yeah, it's hard, but I'm doing it." "What about the tractor, the one you've been obsessing over?" I smiled. "It runs. Seriously. Started it 3 days ago. Still needs work, but the engine runs." Another long pause. "You know what Dad would say about all this?" "What?" "He'd say you're as stubborn as he was, and he'd be so goddamn proud he wouldn't know what to do with himself." I felt my throat tighten. So is that a yes? Let me talk to Jennifer, but yeah, probably yeah. Jennifer turned out to be more practical than Tyler. She saw the steady income stream as valuable, liked the idea of a regular monthly payment they could count on. Within 2 weeks, we had an agreement drawn up. I sold the Westfields to the developer, signed papers that felt like betrayal and relief in equal measure. The money went to Tyler, and suddenly the impossible weight I'd been carrying lightened just enough to breathe. I still had an enormous amount of work ahead, 5 years of payments, a farm to run, soybeans to plant, grow, harvest, and sell profitably, cattle to manage, equipment to maintain, 100 decisions every day that could make or break the entire operation. But I also had something I hadn't had before, a viable path forward. Spring planting happened in late April. Jim and Tommy helped me get the planter calibrated and the fields ready. We worked dawn to dusk for a week straight, getting 100 acres of soybeans in the ground. Sarah brought meals. Martha handled the cattle care so I could focus on planting. Other neighbors I barely knew stopped by to offer advice, lend equipment, share their own stories of struggle and survival. The community that had always been there, that I'd been too isolated to see, revealed itself. On May 15th, I made my first payment to Tyler. On time, from money I'd earned through the developer sale and a small operating profit from selling 5 head of cattle at good market rates. "Congratulations," Tyler said when he confirmed receipt. "Jennifer and I are closing on the house next week. I'm happy for you, really." "I know you are, and Claire, I'm sorry for not being there, for Dad's funeral, for not helping more, for pushing you to sell. I was scared you'd end up like Dad, working yourself to death for something that couldn't be saved." Maybe it can be saved, maybe it can't, but at least now I'm trying on my terms. That's all any of us can do. After we hung up, I went to the equipment barn. The Fergusons sat there fully restored now, new tires, rebuilt hydraulics, fresh paint, not original red, but close enough. It gleamed in the afternoon light, looking almost like it must have looked in 1952 when Dad's father drove it home. I climbed into the seat, started the engine, it fired on the first try now, and drove it out of the barn for the first time in 15 years. The sun was setting, painting the fields in gold and amber. The soybean plants were just starting to emerge, tiny green shoots across 100 acres. The cattle grazed peacefully in the east pasture. Swallows darted through the evening air. I drove that tractor slowly along the edge of the fields, feeling the vibration through the seat, listening to the steady rhythm of the engine, breathing in diesel exhaust and turned earth and growing things. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined 2 months ago. I'd sold part of the farm. I had years of debt ahead. There were no guarantees of success. Farming never offered those. Weather could destroy crops. Markets could crash. Equipment could fail. Any of 1,000 things could still go wrong. But I'd done something I thought was impossible. I'd brought a dead machine back to life. I'd learned skills I never thought I'd need. I'd built connections with people I barely knew. I'd honored my father's memory, not by preserving everything exactly as it was, but by adapting, surviving, finding a way forward that honored what mattered most. I'd called the tractor Rust, because that's all I could see. The decay, the damage, the impossibility of restoration. But she wasn't Rust anymore. She was proof that sometimes impossible just means difficult, that sometimes dead just means sleeping, that sometimes the things worth saving are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless. As the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars appeared, I drove that Ferguson back to the barn. Tomorrow I'd be up at dawn to check the fields, to tend the cattle, to handle the 1,000 small tasks that keeping a farm alive required. Tomorrow I'd continue the work my father started, the work his father started before him. Not because it was easy or profitable or made logical sense, but because it was mine now. My land, my responsibility, my connection to something older and deeper than quarterly profits or market efficiency. The tractor rumbled into the barn, and I shut off the engine. In the sudden silence, I could hear the evening sounds of the farm settling, cattle lowing, wind in the trees, the creak of old structures built by hands long gone. I was home. Not the home I'd planned, not the future I'd imagined, but home nonetheless. And for tonight, that was enough.